Thank you very much. I'm really glad I was able to help. Hi, I'm Reecy, college admissions, financial aid expert, and author of How to Pay for College Without Going Broke. For the past 33 years, I've been showing families how to send their kids to the college of their choice for less than they ever dreamed possible. My special area of expertise is using legal strategies to qualify families for maximum financial aid. My successes in unappealing financial aid offers is legendary. For this series, I'll be answering questions on financial aid I've been asked most often, beginning with an explanation of the process. And here's how it works. Basically, there are two financial aid forms. The CSS Financial Aid Profile, which is brought to you by the College Board, and that form is available as early as October for the 205 approximate, mostly private and a few state colleges. This is a form that is a lifestyle questionnaire. It asks about your cars, your retirement accounts, and a whole host of other things. It's pretty invasive. The FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, is the number 2 form, which all schools require, and that's only available beginning with 1 second after midnight of the new year. Virtually every school requires the FAFSA. The CSS Financial Aid Profile must be submitted usually to these colleges prior to January the 1st, in fact, as early as November the 15th for a number of schools. So you have to check your deadlines and make sure whether your school is a CSS college or not. As far as the FAFSA is concerned, it can be corrected as often as possible. The CSS, on the other hand, once it's submitted, you cannot correct it. So you need to save your answers, continue, complete the form, and then review it before it's submitted. Once it's submitted, the only changes you can make are to add colleges. As far as the FAFSA is concerned, it should be completed in early January with estimates for income and financial questions. The question for income taxes is the following. I did file, I will file, I'm not filing. Obviously, in early January, everyone is going to say, I will file. Once you've filed your taxes, you go back into the form, make the necessary corrections, and then resubmit it. 48 hours later, you can print the form and save a copy. And if there are any changes that need to be made subsequent to that, go ahead and make them. It's no big deal. In many cases, I've had the FAFSA corrected 6 and 7 times after it was submitted. That's a brief overview of the process, but the truth of the matter is, the first step in paying for college is saving for college. As soon as you get married. Because if you don't start saving then, by the time the student becomes eligible for elementary school or junior high, there will have been so many other diversions and so many other issues that you would have had to spend money on or save money for, that you won't be able to accumulate enough money unless you've got really, really big incomes. Because today, and this is 2012, the cost for many of the private colleges is approaching $60,000 for the 2012-2013 school year. Money saved in a student's name under the Uniform Gift or Uniform Transfer to Minors Act account will come back to bite you in the rear end down the road. Money can be saved in those accounts, but because students have no asset protection allowance, for every dollar a student has in their own name, they lose 20 cents per year in financial aid. Parents, on the other hand, have an asset protection allowance, and a two-parent family, with the older parent 48, the asset protection allowance is about $45,000. And what that includes is checking, savings, stocks, bonds, savings bonds, mutual funds, real estate other than your house, and if you have a business with over 100 equivalent full-time employees. Otherwise, the assets of the business are excluded. The small business is the absolute best tax shelter for financial aid, because when one fills out the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, any assets in the name of the business, as long as there are less than 100 employees, is excluded. So you must start saving early. You want to save in safe vehicles. I don't necessarily recommend investing in the stock market because it can be too risky, even though it might be in mutual funds. Because if we have another October 19th, 1989, where the market went down 400 or 500 points, all those gains from the early years can be wiped out, and sending your kid to the college of their choice might be a dream as opposed to a reality. Well, money can be saved in one of two places without being included in the financial aid formulas. Grandparents can save money in a 529 savings plan because that money will not be included in the parent asset portfolio, because the grandparents, assuming they're not part of the household, don't count in the financial aid formulas. And the owner of the 529 plan is the owner of the asset. So as long as the parents don't have one, it won't be included. Assets absolutely, positively should not be in the name of the student. However, if there are assets in the name of the student by the time they get to the 10th grade, those assets can legally be repositioned into financial vehicles that will not be included in the formulas. The money will be guaranteed, safe, insured. It won't be part of the formulas, and the money will be liquid. And those two financial vehicles are tax-deferred annuities and very specialized life insurance products. So those are the two primary places where money should be saved. A 529 plan is sold by brokers throughout the 50 states. Some states give state tax deductions for contributions. There's very little control. You can usually move the asset base once a year. It's virtually all tied up in mutual funds. The money's all at risk. However, all the gains, when it comes time to removing the funds, if they're used for college, the gains will be tax-free. The 529 plans have to be monitored on a very, very tight basis, because once the assets start shrinking, you may have to close the account out. There won't be any tax consequence because you took a loss. And in many cases, if there's a big gain, it might behoove you to take an early gain, pay the tax, and save up the money. Because if you leave it in there too long, the gains can very well be erased when you least expect it. So 529 plans are qualified plans for savings, and the owner of the 529 plan is the one whose asset it is. So if it's outside the family, like grandparents or uncles or aunts or whatever, then the money itself will not be included in the parent asset computations. Yes, but you have to be poor. Because families who are affluent or make $50 or $75 or $100,000 a year are not going to be able to get their fees waived. Families who will qualify for a Pell Grant, which is a federal grant for low-income families, and based on today, in 2012, a family will receive a Pell Grant if their adjusted gross income is around $40,000. So if your family income is somewhere around there, then there's a pretty good likelihood that the college will waive the application fee. Students need to know two things: that money saved in their name will count against them to the tune of 20 cents on the dollar per year. Also, students have an income protection allowance. And in 2012, they raised it. It's now $6,500. So if a student earns less than $6,500, there won't be any consequence. However, if they earn, let's say, $7,000 and they're $500 over the income protection allowance, that extra money will cost them 50 cents on the dollar in financial aid lost. That's pretty stiff. And if they earn $7,000, not only are they going to lose financial aid dollars, they're also going to pay 10% income tax on their income. Doing it themselves. Parents should complete the form, not the student. That's by far the biggest mistake. Financial aid is determined based on parent and student income, parent and student assets, age of the older parent, number of family members attending at the undergraduate level, and the dependent status of the student. And the more you make, the less financial aid you're going to get. But guess what? Would you rather make $100,000 and have to pay $20,000 a year for college, or make $50,000 a year and only have to pay $10,000? I think you choose the former. So making more money will surely not hurt you in paying for college. There's scholarships, loans, grants, and federal work study. And there's also a job. So there are really 5 different types of money that a student can get that will impact on their financial aid. But those are the most common. Scholarships and grants, of course, don't have to be paid back. A federal work study program, the student works and the income earned will offset the tuition. And obviously, if they have a regular job, then they'll have the money and they'll be able to use a portion of it to offset their cost of attendance. And in the freshman year, the Stafford loan is $5,500, $3,500 of which can be either subsidized or unsubsidized. A subsidized Stafford loan is for families whose income is $100,000 or less approximately, and the federal government pays the interest while the student's in school. So therefore, you should never refuse a subsidized Stafford loan, because where can you borrow money at no percent for 4.5 years? In the sophomore year, it's $6,500, and in the junior and senior years, it's $7,500. In addition to the subsidized or unsubsidized portion of the lower amount, there's also a $2,000 per year guaranteed unsubsidized Stafford loan, and the interest rate on that is 6.8%. Parents who have incomes of about $150,000 or less are able to take the student loan interest deduction on their tax return, consequently lowering the net cost to borrow. And I always encourage to borrow the money and pay the interest while the student's in school, so when they graduate, their Stafford loan bill will only be $27,000. Federal work study is an on or off campus job, paid at minimum wage. It's in the cafeteria, the chemistry lab. Some kids are study hall monitors. It can be any number of things. And as long, it's usually $2,000, $1,000 a semester. And the way it works, the first $1,000 earned goes to pay for the award. Anything the student earns above that, they get to keep. Second semester, it starts all over again. And as long as the job doesn't conflict with their studies, I highly recommend taking and applying for. First of all, you have to apply for it when you fill out the FAFSA, because if you don't say that you will accept a work study award, they're not going to offer you one. So the first thing is asking for it, hoping you get one, and if you don't, you can appeal and ask for it. And at the very expensive private colleges, which are now $55,000, $56,000, $57,000 a year, I've been very successful at appealing small work study awards and getting students awards of upwards of $4,000. And the truth of the matter is, there's no way that a student could earn $2,000 at minimum wage in a semester. It's just another way for the, and this is the private schools, obviously. It's just another way for the school to say, okay, they kind of just turn their head and let the thing go through. And if you earn $1,100 or $1,200, they're not going to penalize you because they already gave you $2,000. And I've seen this happen over and over again. Actually, taking out Stafford loans and depending on, and work, of course, during school. There are any number of things students can do as long as they earn less than the income protection allowance. And once they get all that money, they better lend it to their parents so it won't be in their name and they won't lose 20 cents on the dollar for every dollar they have in their name. But loans and work are obviously the two best ways. Of course, if a family is very affluent and they're not going to receive any need-based financial aid, then the student should apply for every single scholarship under the gun so that they will be able to keep the money and use it to pay for college. A private scholarship for a family who gets need-based aid usually turns out to be phantom money. And here's how it works. Let's assume the student is going to Northwestern University, and I had this happen this past year, and the cost of attendance is $55,000, and the expected family contribution, which is the minimum amount that the federal government determines that that family will pay for college, is, let's say, $20,000. So that leaves $35,000 in maximum need-based aid. Well, let's say the school is generous and gives the student a $10,000 grant. At the same time, they had worked for the Kiwanis or the Rotary or the Red Cross and had done community service for a number of years, and they get a $1,000 scholarship. Well, when they go to the awards banquet in May, whoever the presenter is going to ask the student, and what school are you going to? And they'll say, well, I'm going to Northwestern. So the check will be made out to Northwestern University, FBO, the student, for the benefit of the student. So when the college gets the check for $1,000, they simply take a look at the award letter. They now change their portion to $9,000 because there's an outside resource of $1,000. So the scholarship is phantom money. So don't apply for private scholarships if your family is going to qualify for need-based financial aid. But let me preface that. Every family should get a free consultation with an expert in admissions and financial aid prior to getting into the system, so that if they actually want to hire somebody, they'll get some professional help. And if they don't, at least they'll have a heads up on how the whole system works. And too many of the counselors in the schools and all these meetings that they have, they discourage people from hiring outside consultants to fill out the FAFSA and any other financial aid forms. Well, folks, guess what? It doesn't cost anything to fill out an income tax return, but I assure you that certainly 50 to 75% of the population who completes a tax return gets professional help. Have a professional do it. Students are in no position to negotiate anything because it's very, very unlikely that they have the experience to be able to use negotiating strategies that have been around for a number of years, because I've been using them since 1979 to be able to obtain more aid from the school. So you really need professional help. Well, find a rich uncle or aunt who will co-sign a private note. That's the best you can do. Or go to a state college, and if you get really good grades, you might get some state scholarship help. Like in the state of Florida, there's something called the Florida Bright Futures, which offsets a portion of the tuition. It used to offset more of it, but now it's less because the fund is running out of money. Too many students qualified for Bright Futures, and the requirements weren't that high. They raised the requirements a little bit. But if your parents won't pay for college, then you only have one other choice, and that is to ask someone else to co-sign a private loan. The funds aren't, but the contribution made in the prior 12 months is added back to the adjusted gross income, and then you are assessed or lose financial aid dollars. Last year I had a client who has worked for Federal Express for the past 23 years, and he's got twins and 2 other kids, and I looked at his tax return, and I looked at his W-2, and he had put $1,400 into his 401k. And I asked him what kind of tax bracket he was in, and he wasn't sure. And I said, well, it turns out you're in a 0 tax bracket because he didn't pay any income tax. However, the $1,400 that he put into his 401k was added back to his adjusted gross income, and then he lost financial aid dollars on it. So you have to be very careful with retirement plan contributions because the tax deduction received might be less than the financial aid that you lose. So that's another reason why you need a professional to guide you through this whole process. Yes, students who wind up on the wait list get off usually sometime in May or maybe even later. And by that time, a lot of the financial aid for that college year is gone. So the chances of receiving the same amount of aid had you been gotten a normal acceptance aren't going to be the same. However, any award letter can be appealed. And it's like the lottery. You got to be in it to win it. If you want to get more aid, you have to ask for it. But you have to be very careful, and that's why most families are going to need professional help. Tell their parents to make less money and make sure they don't have anything in their name, and make sure that their parents don't have more than what's in the asset protection allowance. But that's really not a question for a student. It's really a question for a parent to review with a financial advisor to determine the best positioning of their money and their assets and their retirement funds and their investments and their 529 plans. And maybe they have a Coverdell, which can be used for, it's another qualified savings vehicle, which can be used for private high school or undergraduate college. You can't use a Coverdell account for graduate school. But students really should take a back seat in the financial aid process because this is really something for parents. I mean, students are certainly not familiar with tax forms, and most parents aren't too familiar as well. Well, they could write a check to the school. Or they can save money in a 529 plan because the asset itself will not be considered in the financial aid calculations. And if they're lucky enough, when it comes time to pay for college, that the 529 plan has increased in value, then all the gains in the 529 plan will be tax-free. Grandparents should not be saving in the name of the students. However, if they do, whatever savings they have, by the 10th grade, the money can be repositioned legally where it's not included in the financial aid calculations. The only one that's responsible is the student. The grandparents are responsible to take care of the student until they're 18 years of age for their health and welfare, but certainly not for college. And as far as parents are not responsible to pay for a student's college either, unless it's in a divorce decree or a separation agreement. That's a real good question. Well, there's something called the ambiguous non-custodial parent strategy. And when there's a separation or a divorce, if the student is living with the more affluent parent and step-parent, and the other parent is living in the same school district, and they are less affluent, nothing will prevent the student from moving out and living with their other parent, who may or may not be remarried, and consequently, they will qualify for more financial aid. So in most instances, one of those families, whether it's a single parent or a parent and another spouse and a whole bunch of kids, one of those families will surely be less affluent than the other. And if they're not living in the same school district when the student's in high school, once the student graduates high school, they can surely move out and go to live with the other parent and whoever else happens to be in that family, even if it's only that other parent. And then the financial aid forms can be refiled, and as long as the student can substantiate that they live there by having a telephone, mind you, a telephone, not a cell phone, a telephone in their name, changing their driver's license, having a voting card, and if they happen to own a car, having it registered at that address, getting all their school records sent to that address, then obviously they substantiated that they're living there. And if that happens to be the less affluent parent, then guess what? They're going to qualify for more financial aid. And in many instances, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars a year difference. The student. It doesn't matter. It's a trick question. It doesn't matter where the student's living, with which parent or ex-parent or whatever. The student is the one responsible to pay. The parent is responsible for their health, wealth, and well-being, but certainly not the cost of college. But as far as who is going to be getting financial aid, or which family is going to qualify for more aid, the financial aid forms are based on the student and whichever parent and or step-parent they're living with. That's the custodial parent and their spouse. And as I said in another question, if they're living with an ex-parent and another spouse, and they're less affluent than the other set of parents, then that family will qualify surely for more financial aid. But the student is free to live with whomever they choose. Nothing. Unless they have some kind of relationship and they happen to be very less affluent than the parent they're living with. And if that person happens to have any relationship or desire to help pay for college, then let the student live with them while they're in school and qualify for more financial aid, and it'll be a hell of a lot painless than living with the other parents. Well, usually most schools have study abroad programs, and whatever financial aid the student gets for school will be applied accordingly to study in Paris or Beijing or Hong Kong or wherever it might be. It works pretty much the same. But obviously when you're on your own in a foreign country, it may cost you more than living in the U.S. As long as they're resident aliens, it's the same. As long as they have a green card and an A number, they're just as welcome to financial aid as those of us who happen to have been born here. If the parents are legal residents, then there's no difference. If the parents are illegal, that could be an issue. None. Because usually they're in zero tax brackets. Parents can get tax breaks, students can't. However, if a student makes a lot of money and they pay for their own tuition, they can get certain tax credits for tuition dollars spent. But that's pretty exceptional where a student makes a lot of money while they're in college. And because if they make too much, then they're going to lose an awful lot of financial aid based on the amount of income they make. And since $6,500 is the income protection allowance, where zero will be effective in financial aid, it's really not going to be a factor. Yes and no. Colleges, of course, will lead families to believe that because times are tough, they can't give out as much financial aid as they have in the past. Well, that's probably the furthest thing from the truth. But you really need to be in the system to know how it operates and how the schools work, to know the real truth. And most of these schools have endowment funds. We're talking private colleges. Obviously, some of the big state schools like University of Michigan or Penn State or whatever have huge endowments as well. But most of these private colleges have endowment funds in the hundreds of millions, or in many cases, billions of dollars. The University of Florida, for example, had about $1 billion in its endowment fund before 2008, and subsequent to that, it went down to $900 million. Okay, they lost $100 million, but they still had $900 left. That's an awful lot of money. Make sure that the parents refile the forms immediately to let the college know that there's been a change and financial aid can be changed accordingly. College really costs whatever you really wind up paying for it. And we won't know until the time you get your sheepskin.